I repeat, we were doing Lacan's imaginary stage. These are the characteristic features of imaginary stage that Lacan talked about, and the parallel that we can draw from Freud is the all the characteristic of imaginary stage are that of the pre-Oedipus stage in Freud. And the second stage is symbolic stage, and all the characteristics in symbolic stage are uh, similar to the Oedipus stage of Freud, and so are the characteristics. Only that Lacan is a linguistic psychoanalyst, so he rewrites the theory in linguistic terms. There you see that the dyadic structure uh, enters into a triadic structure. Sorry, enters into the triadic structure. Here again, it does happen. The same thing happens. And when the father enters the structure, he disrupts the harmony, as was told by Freud. Disrupts harmony. Mute कर दो. So in this case, with the entrance of the father, Lacan recognizes it as the terms he uses for it is father's law, is what regulates the structure now. Father's law regulates this structure. So he will not allow a child to have incestuous relationship either with himself or with the mother. He then father represents the, as was told to you in Freud, he represents the social taboo, he represents the incest, what is incest in a society. He basically represents all the dictates of the society, which can be based on religion, as told you, as I said earlier, or it can be based on traditions. This is what has been done by our ancestors, so we follow the same. So this is where father enters this structure. The father's law is what divides the child from mother's body. So subject object relationship, like I said, gets complicated. The subject object relationship gets complicated because of father's law, and the harmony is therefore disrupted. The child does not anymore recognize himself only with the mother, but has to look for something else, for the connection between the subject and the object. So where does he find it? Since he has to detach himself from the mother's body, and also has to detach himself from deriving pleasure or desires from the body, what does he do? Is that he pushes his desires into the unconscious. Again, the same thing that Freud has already told you, that these desires are what creates the unconscious in the first place. The first thing that creates the unconscious is the repression of your love for the parent. The repression of your love for the parent is the first repression of a child and is the first thing that creates the unconscious. And now, what does the child do now that he is aware that he cannot have a relationship with his mother and he cannot associate with the mother? This is where identity creation takes place. The sense of self becomes very clear. This is also the stage where the child now responds to his name, which also means the name is associated with I. And if another name is called out, and two, he recognizes that this is not me, this is my mother. So he responds differently to N1, which is his own name, and N2, which is the name of the mother. Earlier, he responds to both the names equally because the sense of self and sense of the mother is one. This detachment occurs only in symbolic stage, where he now recognizes the presence of the father who will not allow the relationship between the child and the mother. It's the same stage again because it's Oedipal stage. In the Oedipal stage, there are a few more things that enter this sense, the psyche of a child, which is the sense of sexuality or sexual differences. This is only possible according to Lacan. The terms Lacan uses, I particularly use them. I use them in different color. He gets the sense of sexuality particularly because of the phallus. Again, this was not used by Freud, but Lacan used it for the very first time. I'll take questions later. Let me finish the lecture first. So this becomes according to Lacan, he creates his theory around the same phallus, and this becomes the center of his theory. The center of his theory is this, that all meaning is derived out of phallus, the phallus, which for him in this stage denotes the differences between two genders or sexes, male, female. The difference is that one has it and the other does not. So this gives the child the sense of two different sexes, male and female. So the center is phallus. This is also the same idea which helps in the socialization of the child. Socialization means where he accepts all this. Father's law. This, in sociological terms, is called socialization of the child. Socialization means where a child is made from an animal into a social animal. The process is called socialization. Social animal, where he accepts the norms of the society to be a member of the society and for the structure to work properly. This is also why it's called symbolic stage, because the child accepts the symbolic functioning of the roles that a man has to play and the role that a female has to play. This is why it's called symbolic stage. What Lacan is doing is only that he is rewriting what was already said by Freud about the Oedipal process. He only makes use of the terms that come from language, the terms of language, like subject, object, signifier, signified, symbol. Symbol is also a term that comes from language. Symbol is a poetic technique. So that's the major difference between Lacan and any other psychoanalyst of the time. Now, after the child enters into the stage where he has the sense of the self, I'll erase the rest, that's not important. After the child has a sense of the self and also has a sense of different genders, he becomes a social animal. He accepts his reality around what the society asks him to do. And what he originally had his desires for the object that he associated himself with, he now changes that idea into what the society demands him to be like. Now, the terms that he uses, Lacan himself uses, I'll explain them. Where does this signifier and signified? I did use the terms in my previous lecture, the signified and the signifier, where the signifier is the image that is looking into the mirror. The signifier is the child. So if this is the mirror, what he sees in the mirror is the signified. The signified gives him the sense of whole, his body being whole. And also what is important about signified is the idea that this is where Lacan uses subject for the child and object for the signified. This is also where narcissism begins, where the object of desire becomes this object that can be seen in the mirror. I'll represent it as a child. The object is the image that is seen in the mirror, whereas the subject is the child who is looking into the mirror. This idea is real. This is only an image. The child, now satisfied in the mirror stage about his body being whole, about himself being composed of parts but being whole. Now, where does he go? Now, where does this structure break? As per Lacan, he steps into a post-structuralist anxiety. The post-structuralist anxiety is associated with Derridean concept where all structure breaks down, meaning cannot be derived because you have entered the post-structural anxiety where meaning breaks down, everything breaks down, deconstruction happens. A lot of you don't know about Derridean theory. I did not pick up Derridean theory first to make you understand what happens here. We simply understand post-structuralism here as deconstruction, breaking down of the structures. I did make use of a few binaries where binaries are breaking down. For example, the binary of Saussure is a male and female binary. Where do you see this breaks down? When a third gender enters the story, it breaks down. Similarly, you have an opposition of black and white. Where does this binary break down? When gray enters the story. You have a master and slave relationship. Where does the story break down? When the slave becomes a rebel. So this is how post-structuralism is studied, to brief it out. The child also enters a similar post-structural anxiety when he cannot follow the structure that he wants to follow, the single subject-object relationship between him and the mother. And in the post-structural identity where he has to accept his role as a social animal within the society, he is not able to grasp with reality at times. At times. So Saussure's point here is identify of identities. Saussure's point that identities come about only as a result of difference, like I used male, female, black, white. Identities can only be created with oppositions, that a child can understand his self only in opposition to his mother. This binary breaks down. What breaks the binary? The father breaks the binary. And this results in post-structural anxiety. That one subject is what it is only by excluding the other. I had given you the examples. You understand light only when you understand dark. So it's darkness is something which means absence of light in structural terms. Absence of light means dark. But there is another concept in this. How do you define dawn? How do you define dusk? It's neither the presence of light nor the absence of light. This is where the structure breaks down. Similarly, the identity creation of child also suffers the same post-structural anxiety. It can only understand himself either as himself or not being the mother. But in post-structural anxiety, he has to understand father is there as well. How will he keep himself with the binary? The binary breaks down. So according to Lacan, this is another important and significant point of symbolic stage. The child enters into two stages at once. The child enters into two stages at once. One is and the two stages he enters at once is one where he is able to figure out the sense of sexuality, and the second, he is able to understand language. He learns language at this age and he enters the other stage, sexuality, at the same time. Lacan complicates his theory here. This is where the major complication of Lacanian theory comes in, which is neither associated with Oedipus stage, nor pre-Oedipal, nor anything that Freud has said before. So it becomes difficult only here. So I erase the rest and explain what this means. The child enters two stages of sexuality and language at once. He learns language while he also learns what the idea of mother and father is different, how the two are different, how sexualities are different, how desires are different of one or the other object. So while the child is unconsciously accepting about the realities surrounding the genders, the realities surrounding masculinity and femininity, he's unconsciously accepting this. But at the same time, he's also learning other lessons. He is at the same time learning the lessons of language. And this too is a learning process which happens unconsciously. And where does he associate? Lacan associates the two. The idea of gender is generated while the idea of language is generated for the child. The child learns language in the world of sexuality. In one line, it can be said, the child learns sexuality in the world. The child learns language in the world of sexuality. So in accepting the given structures of the society, that he has to go by the norms, follow the procedure that is followed by the society, accept his role, accept what the role of mother plays in the society and the father plays, he is also at the same time accepting not as the sexual roles which make up a family and a society, but also how language functions around it. Language like masculinity, man, boy, girl, female, femininity. So in accepting the structure, in accepting society, he is also accepting sexual roles, so social and sexual work together. And how do both work? Both work unconsciously and both work through language. How do you understand what the society wants you to do? Through language, through communication. How do you internalize it? Unconsciously. Nobody makes you sit and makes you write on copy, this is what you do and this is what you don't. So it's happening unconsciously. This is called the symbolic stage, where symbolically the child is accepting what his society wants. He is symbolically accepting what sexually he is demanded to do and not do. I'll take questions now.